guilty on all counts.
The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
Big decisions this week by a New York jury and by Texas voters. Former President Trump found guilty on 34 counts, while here in Texas, Governor Abbott claims victory after helping unseat some of his fellow Republicans in the House so he can push through private school vouchers. But will Speaker Dade Felen stand in the way of that? He just survived a bruising and ugly runoff.
This was a terrible, awful knockdown, drag out.
Felen just narrowly hanging on to his seat. Will he be reelected Speaker? Political consultant Matt Mackowiak weighs in on that. And 6 words from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett have sparked memes, songs, skits, and a lot of reaction across the country. But should she have taken the bait?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good morning, Texas. I'm Jason Wheeler in for Jason Whiteley this week. Races have been decided now, but grudges remain. The primary runoff now behind us, and in the most high-profile contest in the state, the incumbent, targeted by heavyweights from within his own party, held on to his seat, but just barely. Republican House Speaker Dade Felen, one of the most powerful leaders in Austin, just narrowly defeating his challenger David Covey by only about 400 votes. Many other Republican incumbents who were targeted lost. Also, in Dallas County, Democrats came out big for incumbent Sheriff Marion Brown, who won 69% of the vote, beating her opponent, former sheriff and former gubernatorial candidate Lupe Valdez. Neither Felen nor Brown have opponents in November. Following the primary and the runoff, Governor Abbott is now predicting that school vouchers will get through in the next legislative session. He says the House now has enough votes to pass what he calls school choice. Abbott helped to unseat fellow Republicans in the House who had voted last year to block his voucher plan. 5 of the incumbents running for re-election lost in March, and 3 more were defeated on Tuesday in the runoffs. The Republican Party of Texas has a new leader, Abraham George, taking over now as party chairman after winning election at the state GOP convention last week. He defeated 5 other candidates and was endorsed by outgoing chair Matt Rinaldi. George, a former Collin County GOP chair, ran for the Texas House in the March primary. The most watched, most anticipated, and most expensive runoff during last week's election was in Southeast Texas. Republican House Speaker Dade Felen barely hanging on, as we said, to his House District 21 seat, defeating challenger David Covey, who had big-name Republican endorsements. Teresa Woodard went to Beaumont to cover the race.
Dade Felen walked into his watch party in Beaumont with the swagger of someone who'd sailed to victory. In reality, he squeaked by. Less than 400 votes the other way, and these high fives and hugs from supporters and fellow House members would not have happened.
This was a terrible, awful knockdown, drag out.
The race to retain his House seat is believed to be the most expensive state House race in Texas history. It was ugly.
It was just unacceptable. It was lies and it was deceit, and we're done with that.
Challenger David Covey was endorsed by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Attorney General Ken Paxton, and former President Donald Trump. They all hurled insults at Felen. Despite passing bans on abortion, DEI, and procedures to help transgender teens transition, plus legalizing permitless carry and spending millions on Operation Lone Star on the border, they labeled Felen not conservative enough.
I ran to give the voters a choice, but the things that I ran against were him not doing what he said he was going to do on the border, abstaining on some school choice votes where he could have empowered parents to pick the best education for their children.
But the biggest issue was a vote to impeach Ken Paxton. The AG's revenge tour took out a lot of incumbents. Felen survived. After the election, Paxton indicated any House member who supports Felen's speakership will be the target of the next tour of revenge.
House District 21 is not for sale. I will be your state rep for HD 21, and I will be your speaker for the Texas House in 2025.
Dade Felen is going back to Austin. Voters decided that. The rest of the House will determine if he's going back to being Speaker. And that's not decided yet.
So the Republican grudge match continued this week with the runoffs, and we have had several more House members who were picked off by Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton. So these grudge matches have been settled at the ballot box now, but what happens now going forward with these factions of Republican leaders in this state? Political consultant and Travis County Republican Party Chairman Matt Mackowiak joining us here. Matt, thanks so much for being on with us after a momentous week for the party here in Texas. I just have to start off asking you, what does this next legislative session look like now?
Yeah, look, this is the most divisive primary and primary runoff, in the modern era in Texas politics. Most divisive I can remember, most money spent, most controversy, the largest number of attacks, and to have this many incumbents get beat. I think the governor last night, in the last couple of days, has said that he believes he's flipped basically 15 votes on school choice alone. I mean, that's an unusually large number to flip in one election cycle, particularly when you're just talking about on the primary side. So he's in a position now to almost be absolutely certain he's going to get a school choice bill through the House and the Senate for the first time in Texas history. Look, the session, I think, is a huge question mark. It starts with who is the speaker.
Yeah.
It's now clear Dade Felen wants to run for another term, a third term. I think that's uncertain.
Yeah, you've got the Attorney General threatening other Republicans if they vote for him for Speaker again. But, Felen's insisting he's going to be Speaker again. Does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, those factions are not going to, they're not going to evaporate. The factions are still there. The opinions are still there. The hurt feelings are still there. They tried to beat Felen and they didn't. Now, they did get rid of his number of his lieutenants. They got rid of members that weren't on board with school choice. There were a lot of gains from the sort of conservative grassroots side that are significant. But in the end, Felen is coming back. And I don't think right now you can say with certainty he will not be Speaker. I probably thought that maybe 2 weeks ago. Not necessarily sure that, but of course, to do that, he's going to have to put a large coalition together, almost certainly with a large number of Democrats in it, and that would create a lot of problems with the Senate, probably with the governor. Certainly problems related to how many Democratic chairs you'd have, whether school choice would pass.
Matt, last thing before we let you go here, you had an unsuccessful last-minute bid for state party chair of the Republican Party, and you didn't have a lot of positive things to say about the state of the party here, and you wanted to get in there and sort of shake things up. And you didn't have, the greatest things to say about the guy who ended up taking over there. What are your thoughts about the state party right now, the Republican Party? It's dominant here in Texas, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, my concern level is pretty high. And I think it's actually higher now with the new state chair who doesn't have any experience, has never had any success, and has some problems. So, when you only have 4 paid staff in a state of 30 million people, there's a problem. When the victory chair quits for the first time in RPT history, that's a problem. When the convention is a total mess and loses money, that's a problem. And that's going to affect us in the fall.
Does it really change any outcomes? If nothing changes with the state party here in Texas, come November, does that really change an outcome for a Trump on the ballot, for a Cruz on the ballot?
Yeah, in terms of an outcome, I don't think it changes Trump's outcome. He's going to win Texas. I think that's pretty much decided. The Cruz margin could be very close. In fact, Senator Ted Cruz has spent most of the last week trying to convince anyone who'll listen that this is a very close, very competitive race. I think 4 of the last 5 polls have shown it within the margin of error. Colin Allred has raised more money than Beto did this time 6 years ago. So, where RPT comes in is do they have the money to do an early vote by mail program? That's huge. I don't think they're going to have the money to do that. Are they able to do the cut rate postage program that all of our candidates rely on? There's a big question as to whether they can do that. These things are going to affect the margin. They'll affect Trump's margin, they'll affect Cruz's margin, and they'll affect the down ballot races that matter so much.
Matt Mackowiak, thanks for being with us. This has been an interesting election year already, and probably only going to thicken that plot as we head through the next several months. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right, let's dive into this now with our roundtable today to talk about the politics of all of this. Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. We've got Ian Mitra from the Texas Tribune with us, and Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. A lot to digest here just out of the couple of things that we've just seen here. Bud, what is your takeaway from all of this?
Well, the first thing we need to know is that yes, Dade Felen turned out a lot more votes, even more in the runoff than he did in the original primary. He had like 400 more votes in the runoff. But the point is that David Covey had 1,000 fewer in the runoff. David Covey lost this race because he couldn't turn out Republicans, not because of whoever Dave Felen turned out.
And he had all the endorsements. He even had former President Trump endorsing him. Ian, what are your thoughts on all of this? What do we see going forward?
Well, what we're going to go see going forward is going to be a really heated battle for the speaker's race once we hit January. And Dave Felen and his allies, and he's got several Republicans in the House who went and campaigned for him, who may be feeling a bit, they will say that they've had one of the most conservative records in passing laws in this past session. And so they're going to use that. It's going to be a really pitched battle behind the scenes of caucusing and kind of lobbying for speaker votes. Phelan has two declared challengers right now. How they are going to make the case that they're going to lead them, and build a coalition is going to be really the test.
Bernadine, you've been watching all this closely. What's your read?
Oh, definitely the speaker's race is where the focus is getting ready to go on, not even if we're having the November election, because the question is who will take Phelan's place if he doesn't. And there's no one actually that can get the votes or has a consensus. So, and even if the Republican Party can get a candidate out of their caucus that they agree on. So that's where the biggest fight is getting ready to be.
And how much Democratic help are they going to need, and what is that going to do to the whole thing, too? Yeah.
Well, he needs 57 votes in the caucus, but he could probably get that. When you have the worst turnover in 25 years, there's a case to be made for changing speakers, but he's still got a lot of support.
All right, so much still left to get to. When we come back this morning, should Jasmine Crockett have taken the bait with this comeback to Marjorie Taylor Greene?
If someone on this committee then starts talking about somebody's bleach blonde, bad-built butch body.
Inside Texas Politics, back in a moment. Just 6 words from a U.S. representative from Texas have sparked memes and songs and a lot of strong reactions all across the country. Bleach blonde, bad-built butch body is what she said. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene had first insulted Dallas Democratic Representative Jasmine Crockett by making a comment about her fake eyelashes. And it was Crockett's comeback that you just heard there that has gone viral. She talked about it on this week's episode of our Y'all-itics Political podcast. Congresswoman Crockett represents District 30, which includes most of southern Dallas County and a part of Tarrant County.
Congresswoman Crockett is on the line with us now. Congresswoman, did you ever expect that point of order to take on a life of its own like it has?
No, I don't think anyone would ever expect memes and songs and skits and all the things. I absolutely had never anticipated this.
So lay out kind of what happened there. When Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene made that comment, give me an idea kind of what your first reaction was before Representative Ocasio-Cortez jumped in. What was your reaction and what were you thinking then?
I was caught off guard because Marjorie is wild and ridiculous, but she had never crossed the line to actually attack a member of the other party. Now, she will attack her own members. She will attack the president, as we've seen in the State of the Union addresses, but she had never done this. And so initially, I had to try not to get up out of my seat, if I'm being honest, because I knew that it was nothing more than her just trying to poke the bear and use this as an opportunity to try to demean me and raise money, because that's what she does.
Have you run into Marjorie Taylor Greene since all this happened?
I have not seen her. No.
Not at all. Have you spoken to her at all? Email, text, anything like that?
Nope.
If she were to be listening to this episode of Y'all-itics, any message for her? Any comment to her?
Focus on your work. I mean, we can disagree, but that doesn't mean that you are somehow entitled to then come after me personally. And that's it. Just focus on your work, focus on serving your district. It's what I'm trying to do every single day that I show up in the halls of Congress.
I want to ask you something that Donna Brazile said the other day on ABC's This Week. She's, of course, the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, political strategist. She essentially said after all this happened, maybe you shouldn't have taken the bait. What do you say to that?
I disagree. And I think that we have different generations of Democrats right now. And when I say different generations, I'm not just talking about age. I think that we have different approaches, right? We are being faced with something that we've never had in American politics, right? When you think about things like the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, these were things that were passed in the 50s and 60s, and we could get them passed. Right now, we can't get a reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act because we have been co-opted by people that literally don't believe in diversity, equity, or inclusion, affirmative action. Like, we're turning back the hands of time on repro. Like, we have a different machine that has pulled in. And I just don't think that you can continue to approach this different kind of machine that we're dealing with using the same old tricks. And it's one of the things that people have said about the Democratic Party. They said, listen, you guys are weak.
But doesn't, some people might hear this who and say that, listen, this just exacerbates the divisions we have in government right now. What would you say to that?
I here's the deal. Until people decide that they want to elect serious lawmakers, this is the space that we're functioning in. And I could have sat there quietly. That could have been a thing. I chose to defend myself because when I went to Congress, I didn't go to Congress to be anyone's doormat. And, to me, it's hard to tell my district that I will stand up and I will fight for your rights and I will fight for you. And sometimes that means even fighting for some of their lives. And I don't even stand up and fight for myself.
That was just a part of the conversation. Congresswoman Crockett also explained why she decided to trademark her comeback to Congresswoman Green. And she talks about what Republicans said to her in the hallway after that committee meeting. This episode of Y'all-itics is ready to download this weekend. That QR code takes you right to it. All right, the roundtable is coming up next when we come back. And welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. I'm Jason Wheeler, in for Jason Whiteley. It's time again for our Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. With us once again, Ian Mitra from the Texas Tribune, Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe, a political producer at WFAA in Dallas. So let's start off this round with Donald Trump's conviction on all counts in his hush money trial in New York earlier this week. How does this affect the November election? We've already seen high-profile Republicans here in this state coming out, calling this a sham trial, a kangaroo court, et cetera, mirroring a lot of the language from the former president. Bud.
I think this helps Republicans in Texas, at least so far. I think you still have the fact that he's always had the staunch religious conservatives who believe that Trump is carrying out biblical prophecy, no matter how they feel about what he might have done 15 years ago. But now all the people who were really tired of the show and lukewarm to him are rallying around him. One thing about Texans, we love outlaws.
Ian, what's your take on this? We've seen these high-profile, as I mentioned, these high-profile Republicans in the state immediately putting out statements in support of the former president after his conviction. No surprise there.
No, and Bud's right. This is going to probably have some, presidential elections always will drive up turnout. And then, of course, this verdict, and, obviously we'll see what happens when sentencing happens in July and the appeals process. But this is going to drive people who may have not been as interested to vote. It's going to drive some people who may have been kind of standing on the sidelines a bit. There's going to be some folks who are going to be energized by this one way or the other, and we're just going to have to see who those groups are, whether independents, Republicans who may not have been as passionate about voting for Trump this time. It's going to energize a lot of folks. Okay, so let's say it does energize those Republican voters. Do we see that help to push the Texas House even further to the right, Bernadine? We didn't see that necessarily in the runoffs here with at least the federal offices that were up for grabs.
You know what, Jason? I think that we need to wait. I think it's a little bit too early, regardless of what Bud and Ian said. I think it's a little too early. But keep in mind, we still have to go through the sentencing. And I don't think it's going to impact him at all in terms of Texas. but it's going to turn out voters on both sides, and definitely when he's sentenced, because I don't think that they're going to send him to jail. But just think about it. We still have that process to go through, but it's going to mobilize. Now, depends on. I think it's going to mobilize both sides.
Bud, what do you make? Oh, I'm sorry, Ian, go ahead.
Just Jason, one thing to note about the Texas House races, because of how the House districts are drawn, so many of these races are predetermined just because of how they're drawn too. So the impact there certainly are some races, but it's because of the drawing of the districts, it's going to have not as much impact.
But it's a
so
good
much
question,
here in Texas
Jason.
is decided in the runoffs or the primaries.
Anytime you're worried the Texas House might get more conservative, it probably will. So that was a good question.
Yeah.
In these congressional races, you have Craig Goldman in the Fort Worth area, Tony Gonzalez. Both of them were endorsed by Greg Abbott, and we did see that Greg Abbott carried a lot of weight with his endorsements. Craig Goldman is the Lockheed candidate in Fort Worth. That always wins. Tony Gonzalez win showed you can't win just being the gun candidate.
But that sort of went against the MAGA movement here in Texas, though when we saw those state races, it seems like they did very well there. Greg Abbott had a really good night once again. He's had a good spring.
Well, absolutely. And he spent a lot of money, and his targeting, his messaging, it was unparalleled. But keep in mind, the concern is going to be more with Cruz's race. And those state houses have some competitive somewhat. But Cruz, the Republican Party has to get that vote out for Cruz as well.
All right, we're out of time, but just quick show of thumbs, up or down. Do vouchers get through this time?
Oh, vouchers going through.
Yeah, I think they'll get through. Yeah.
Yes,
thumbs up all the way around on that. We will have to wait and see. It starts in January all over again. Thanks to the whole panel here, and thank you for watching as well once again this week. We'll see you right here next Sunday on Inside Texas Politics. Have a great week.